Hey, and welcome to the Stories Unveiled podcast, where we talk about the purpose in every story and how to live in freedom from your past. I'm your host, Ashley Sears, and each episode you're invited into a conversation about real life between me and a friend. I believe if an issue is addressed in the Bible, then it's important to create a safe and supportive space to discuss it. While some of these conversations are not easy, I do believe they are worth it. If you like what you hear, please visit our ministry at storiesunveiledconference.com. Thank you for joining today. You are listening to episode 6 of the Stories Unveiled podcast. This episode, I was joined by my friend, Amber Grant. Amber is a wife, mom of 2 amazing boys, and an advocate for people with special needs. In this conversation, Amber and I are going to chat about raising kids with disabilities, along with the challenges, unexpected blessings, and intentional purposes that comes with it. I hope this conversation is helpful. Today, we are going to chat about raising kids with disabilities and special needs. I just want to ask first by having you tell me about you, your family, your wonderful boys that you have, Luke and Matthew. Tell me a little bit about you guys.
So, telling you a little bit about myself, and then just leading into how I built a family. Yeah. I was raised by a single mom. I was raised in a blended family, and that was hard to grow in. But God always sought me and came for me and drew me at so many different places and points in my story. And I used to really think that my faith was a result of my upbringing because my mom, she got saved when I was young, but we were kind of in and out of church. But I saw, looking back now throughout my life, I've seen God pursue me personally, not just as a result of my faith being raised, because, my parents, my mom, and just people, everyone's faith fluctuates at times.
Right.
And just seeing that God only ultimately has been responsible for my relationship with him.
Yeah.
And it's been a relief, honestly. So, but that being said, I met my husband. I was a whopping 18 years old.
Baby.
And we joke around. He proposed after 3 weeks, and we got married after 3 months. And I just, this is a public service announcement. We do not recommend that to anyone. It worked out for us because the Lord's hand was obviously totally on it. We've been married almost 23 years. And
congratulations.
Thank you. But again, we don't recommend that to anyone. But that being said, just a small snippet, I think it's just so important. An important part of my story is that when I met my husband did not know the Lord. And I had a really hard trudging road with male relationships. And I met him, and I had never been treated that wonderfully in my life. And I fell completely in love with him. It was love at first sight. And about 3 weeks in, about 2.5 weeks in, the Lord spoke to my heart. And I was definitely not walking perfectly with him at the time, not even close, but my faith is still, he found me and saved me. So I knew the truth. And the Lord just spoke to me and said, you can't completely give your heart to this if he doesn't know me. And I was like, challenge accepted. And so
he will know you.
All of my, Tweety Bird, blind love was diverted that to sharing the gospel with him. And it was interesting because he would tell people, that Amber girl, she is so hot, and I am so into her, and I love her. If she would just stop talking about all that Holy Spirit crap. And it was just heavy for him. It was frustrating for him. But I could tell also that his heart was very open.
Yeah.
And one night we had just gotten an argument. It resulted in a lot of fighting because the faith aspect and the trust aspect, without all the other things that, make sense to a person, I think he just... I I just said, I don't know what else I can do to help you understand. And I left. And that night, he ended up on his knees on the floor and gave his life to Christ. And the next morning, he went out and got a ring and proposed to me.
Oh, wow.
So it was like, and he just very much shares with people that he truly believes that God, in his sovereignty, being God, that he would not send the wrong message and the wrong messenger.
He used you. God used you. To bring Jason.
Right. And then in turn, God used Jason to show me a true, authentic revelation and encounter with Christ. Because I grew up where it was like, we had fire insurance, but having a relationship with Jesus was rare.
Yeah.
I think the understanding of that, not feeling afraid of God, but truly wanting to know him and knowing that he's for you and not against you, has a plan and purpose for your life. But anyway, when he gave his life to Christ, he had all these, he had like Marilyn Manson and White Zombie and nothing like against, everyone, but he just took everything.
He wasn't walking with
comic
the Lord.
books. Yeah. And he took everything. And I remember walking with him to a dumpster and he took everything without even, and I didn't say anything to him. He just,
it was on his own.
He immediately started craving the word and he just wanted to be in the word and he just wanted to hear music. And speaking of music, he, I don't know if you remember, if you've heard of Disciple, we love Disciple. And I remember the first Disciple song he played and I was like, this is so blasphemous. He's like, it's not. God inhabits the praise of his people. And I was like, whoa. Like, he just in turn started teaching me the word and teaching me about Jesus. And it was powerful. So that being said, there was this moment where he didn't know the Lord yet. And I looked at him and we would go days without talking. We didn't even eat. We were just like so in love. And I looked at him and I said, I believe that we have a love that could walk through fire. And I look back now and I recognize now that it was prophetic.
Yeah.
And at the time it felt, we only see a small slice of our life. And then I look back now because we have gone through fire.
23 years later.
Look back. A blended family. My husband has 2 daughters. I'm a stepmom. I have 2 special needs children. We've seen trauma. We've seen grief. We've walked through death together. We've had to learn how to be healthy partners to each other. And it's a constant, work in progress when we weren't given examples. So that being said, we got married, and about 2 years, I think a year and a half later, we had Luke.
Okay.
And we were so stoked about having Luke. We called him our little burrito because the way they wrap him in the hospital.
The swaddle.
Yep. And he's still our big burrito now.
Big burrito. Yeah, he's bigger than you now.
He's way big. Yeah. But we had Luke, and all my dreams of being a mom and a wife and all these things were coming true. And that being said, we were still experiencing a lot of difficulty in having a blended family and what that what that does to a marriage. But that being said, when Luke was so we had Luke, and then when Luke was 5, we had Matthew, and here we are. But each of them have their own stories, which you and I are talking about. But
so you got married almost 23 years ago. That's amazing that Jason found Jesus through your relationship. I have a similar story like that with my husband. I firmly believe that although God doesn't always, he can for sure use spouses and or significant others to draw the other to him. So that's amazing. Then you had Luke and you had Matthew. Luke is your oldest, and he is how old right now?
He is 21.
What?
He's legal.
I remember when he was 18.
Now. Legal adult age.
Okay. Luke is 21 and Matthew is 16?
16.
Because he is my daughter's age. Yes. Okay. So you have Luke and Matthew, Maddie as you call him.
Maddie Cake.
Maddie Cake. So you said when Luke was 5, Maddie was born. What were the first 5 years with Luke like? Tell me about that, because I will just address Luke and Matthew have special needs, extreme special needs. So we'll start with Luke since he's your oldest. What were those first 5 years like? Tell us the story about Luke.
Well, like I said, we had Luke. We were super excited. His birth story was pretty normal, I feel like. my pregnancy, I think I had maybe some high blood pressure that wasn't properly addressed, but it wasn't anything to me that was extreme or huge.
You had a relatively
normal pregnancy. I didn't drink or smoke or even have coffee. I did gain a lot of weight and had a lot of chocolate milk.
But you did all the other right things.
I did all the other right things.
Yeah.
But I had him, and the labor was kind of long, and he had a little bit of a hard time getting out. But when he came out, his what they call APGAR scores, were normal. He quickly caught up to everything, and he was just the best baby. He was such a good baby and so fun and just so much personality. And but he had a lot of he started having a lot of ear infections.
Okay.
He had 10 by the time he was 1. So we had a lot. That's a lot. So 10 rounds of antibiotics, and as we all know, there's like so much gut, involvement these days. Your gut health is like your second brain. And so, looking back, I think that, there was some effects there. But, genetically speaking, like no one in my family has autism. My husband's family, there's ADD in his family, but there's nothing like that. So that didn't really line up. But when he was about 1, it was his first birthday party. And I remember he took a long nap and there were all these people over. Like he had fallen asleep and he woke up and it's like his birthday party, right? Typical 1-year-old. You're like he wasn't excited. He was straight faced. And he'd had his 1-year checkup. Yeah. About 3 days before that. And I remember people asking me, can he hear okay? Because it was really fast. We had taken him in for his 1-year checkup and he got his they do all their stuff, and he got his 1-year vaccines, and so he developed a really high fever, a 103.3 fever for about 3 or 4 days. Yeah. And he was screaming, almost nonstop. And he had a normal diet before that. Again, he had about 6 words before that. He was walking, everything was on time. But within about 2 weeks, everything changed. He started vomiting up all his food. So we had to go backwards to formula, and they were trying soy formula, and we were taking out, we were just like
thinking maybe he had allergies or something.
Like all of a sudden these, some allergies had developed, and he lost all of his words. He stopped responding to his name. He stopped making eye contact. And it was very sudden. And I remember my mom, poor thing, he adored Nana. And I remember he kind of went through this phase where she felt like he didn't even care about her. Oh. And that wasn't him, you know? That was what he was battling on the inside. And his autism and his inflammation and all the chaos that was going on inside his body. But he was, so about 13 months, we got in the pediatrician, and she said, well, let's refer you to infant toddler program. So we started doing, evaluations and some therapies, got on the wait list to see the developmental pediatrician. Then when we got in to see him, the Lord spoke to me like 3 days before that, and just took me through the word. And because I had a developmental therapist tell me, I think he might have autism. And I was like, I hate you. Get out of my house. I didn't say that, but that's what I was thinking. And what I did was I immediately started writing these notes, like progress notes to myself, about like where Luke, like what Luke was doing. And I remember in the moment I was lying to myself as I was writing these things. It was like I was definitely stretching what was really happening. And so I definitely think I was in denial, preparing for that appointment. And then the Lord walked through to me, and he just showed me like almost like a tunnel, and that to me it was like at the end of the tunnel, it was just dark and there was just going to be an ending. But he showed me that he was also in autism if my son was diagnosed. And that was about 3 days before. And that, and then I went in, and the doctor, I think he knew the Lord, and, it was just, it wasn't as hard as I thought, but it was still, I don't want to say like a stake in the ground, another point it's a definitive point in my life. Yeah.
His autism diagnosis.
Yeah. It was a grieving point. Yeah. And it's a grieving point, and then you go, okay, what now? Because I'm not, I know a lot of people can be completely taken down by something like that. And I just didn't, for me, when we get, I feel like, attacked, or when grief happens, or when tragedy happens, or when just life happens.
Right.
For me, there's my initial, I am definitely like an animal in a cage with the Lord,
Yeah.
And I have to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
But then,
so your fight or flight is fight.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. But then I always use the pain for fuel.
Right.
I don't know why. I don't think that that's something I can
You probably don't even cognitively. It just, you use it for fuel too.
No, because what's my other
right now?
option?
You are an advocate,
right,
for special needs and people with disabilities and such. And so you've used it now. We'll get to more of your story here in a minute, but you've used that. But no, you're right.
Because what's the options?
Yeah.
I can't. I think what I tell people is we always have options. Mm-hmm. And in my situation, and I'll probably I'll try to recap that, but when you learn about Maddie, I mean, this is just Luke, because right after that, Luke, right then I engaged full, I went to 2, national conferences. Yeah. I changed his diet. We took, gluten and dairy out. We detoxed him. We started doing gut healing. We saw huge success with gut healing. We did intensive behavioral intervention, applied behavior analysis. And we did, a ton of therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, sensory integration. We
all
just hit
things.
it. We hit it hard.
Yeah.
And so by the time he was 5, I was like, you
were an expert.
Well, we were a freight train, just going, at full speed.
Yeah.
And I had, on that note, I had polycystic ovarian syndrome. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I had really not been taught about health growing up. And I was extremely overweight, and I'd gained all this weight and had Luke, and we were like a supersize me family, through therapies. It was like McDonald's, wherever, and I loved coffee, ice cream. And we just, food, I grew up in a family like food was life. Yeah. And I was extremely overweight, and I had a huge health scare. And when Luke was about 4.5. Mm-hmm. And I got diagnosed with pancreatitis, and I didn't drink.
Yeah.
They were like, "Are you a heavy drinker?" No. And do you do drugs? No. So, but I had a really good doctor that looked into some things, and it found out that my triglycerides and my cholesterol were just absolutely through the roof. Mm. And I got some really good guidance, lost a lot of weight, 40 pounds in about 3 months, and then got pregnant with Matthew. And I wouldn't have been able to get pregnant for probably since I had Luke, because I just continued to gain weight, and my, my system wasn't working.
And everything.
It wasn't working. It wasn't functioning correctly. And so poor Maddie, I was, I got pregnant, and my poor husband was like, I see all these stories these days of how you tell someone you're pregnant, or have you have gender reveals. We didn't have that. This was 20 years ago, And my poor husband, I was super stressed. I walked out and I slapped it down. I said, "I'm pregnant." It wasn't even a positive. It was just poor. I think it's probably really traumatic for him. And he stood up, and he was like, like panicky. And he's like, "What?" And I was sad and upset. I was sad and upset.
Yeah.
And
at his reaction?
No.
You were sad and upset that
because I had lost all this weight. My cholesterol was getting down,
and then
I was
you find out
my health. And so the thought of gaining weight was like a risk to me.
Right. Which happens when you get pregnant.
Yes. Yeah. And, but you know what? We were like, okay, we're gonna have a baby.
Yeah.
That's okay. I wanted more babies. I just, I was like kind of, oh my gosh, and then, I got influenza.
Okay.
And it was interesting because we were demoing the floors in our house, and it was so bad and so dusty. My mother-in-law Luke ended up in the hospital with some kind of horrible virus. And we went back to our house, and there's no floors, no nothing. So my mother-in-law graciously paid for a hotel room for us. And we got influenza right after my husband and I did. And so we call it to this day influenza, where you get the body aches, high fever. We call it the hotel flu.
Hotel flu. Oh, man.
Because that's all. It was so traumatic. We're like, do you have the hotel flu?
Oh, man.
And so that going forward is the only thing that I can think of that lines up with what they told me when Matthew was born. But when I was about 5 months pregnant, you go in and my mom's there and Jason's there. We're going to find out the sex of the baby. And we go in and we're getting used to having a baby again.
Yeah.
We're like, okay, we're going to have another baby. And they're like, everything looks great. It's a boy. And I don't know why they did it this way, but my husband's like, I'm going to go back to work because he had taken on his lunch break. And my mom was there and my husband left. And the doctor came back in. A doctor came in and said we found, and this is exactly how they said it. It wasn't a technical term, but there was a bright spot in his heart and a few air bubbles in his kidneys.
Did you know what any of that meant?
No.
Okay. But it was noteworthy enough to say. But they did say, these could be positive markers for Down syndrome. Oh, okay.
Or they could just be false positives. It could mean nothing. So we're going to recheck you in 10 weeks. So that was 20 weeks. We're going to recheck you in 10 weeks, and then we'll just see how things are.
Can I back up? Or not back up. Can I ask you a question for a second? So I just want to recap a little bit. Luke was 5 when Maddie was born, and you had this special needs child who had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Did he have any other diagnosis?
At the time, no.
At that point, no. And was he nonverbal still at 5?
Yes.
So there were some significant things. You had mentioned earlier that you were a freight train. You guys were just like advocating like crazy. You were doing all the things. And then you find out you're pregnant and it was like, oh my gosh. But okay, you embrace it, you move forward, you do it. And then at about 20 weeks, you find out another shoe's potentially going to drop because Matthew may or may not have Down syndrome or something going on, but they had said Down syndrome. So you wait the 10 weeks and then what?
So at that point, I just instantly felt something in the back of my mind. And it's almost like, when you're getting sick, you're like,
you can tell that it's coming.
I'm not sick. And then your throat and you start to get gunky and you're like, I'm not sick. I'm not sick.
Yeah.
I felt this in the back of my head and in my mind and then it traveled to like my heart and my gut. And I ended up having a mental breakdown. I was in bed for about 2 weeks because I just thought I cannot have another special needs child.
Yeah.
I cannot. And it's so interesting because, the way we're raised and the way we know and understand, come to know and understand God and, our theology really comes into play in these moments because I was mad that I was pregnant.
Yeah.
It's my fault. I didn't want him. And it wasn't that I didn't want him.
Right.
It was that I was surprised. It was that I wasn't expecting it. It was that it was
But did you think you were being
inconvenient
punished?
At the time? I thought that I just thought something's wrong with him because I wasn't grateful.
Got it.
And so many people just want to have a baby.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I thought I did it.
Yeah.
And even Luke, I thought I plopped him in front of VeggieTales a lot. And maybe
that's why.
And I'm like, that's why he doesn't talk because I don't talk enough to him and I didn't label everything. I wasn't one of those moms that honestly drives me batty when they're like stopping. Did you see this now? Can you point? What is this? I'm like, that wasn't me. I was just talking to him like he was normal. Like he was a part of, he joined, my husband and I got married. He joined the family,
Yeah.
It was like, everyone was like, he has autism. You should have a schedule. I'm like, man, he's going with us. Like he's going to fly by the seat of our pants.
Yeah.
And now
you thought being a quote, I'll say better mom because you're a great mom, but
yeah, thanks. It was all these things that I thought, what did I do?
What did I do?
What did I do? What did I take? What did I eat? And it's just kind of in our nature. And I just kind of want to explain that. When I met with the developmental pediatrician, what he said to me is, as a mother, nurturing means development. When we nurture our children, that causes them to develop. And when they don't develop correctly or when something's wrong, then that string, it feels tied to us because it's like their development is what
we feel it's tied to us.
Right.
Because like we had something to do with it.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah. So Matthew was, so fast forward to, I had a slight mental breakdown. I didn't get out of bed for about 2 weeks. I just had so much panic. And again, all these, we're feeling like God was, instead of a relationship and knowing that God was for me and not against me, I felt like, again, I was in this place where, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z right, then I'll be blessed. If I screw up, then I'm out. It's this complete incorrect sense that I've learned about God that, but then it was very limited and very, so that being said, God kind of showed me, well, if he has Down syndrome, like you have a special needs kid, like you can do this.
Yeah. I've prepared you for this.
Right.
Sort of.
And a lot too, I was like, they said it could be nothing.
Yes.
So
you had to cling to that
place,
too.
I was like, Amber, you're just overreacting.
Right.
It's probably nothing. These are false positives. A couple bright spots in, in his heart. Like maybe he just has a heart condition.
Right.
I say that lightly. Because to me that seems light,
right now, knowing what you know, which is, when did you find out his diagnosis?
So we went in 10 weeks. And again, it's just interesting. Everything that happened, I was alone. All these huge times I was alone. Like Jason was gone, or at work, or when Matthew has had a huge seizure and stopped breathing, alone. When they came and told me the news, alone. And I just find that interesting.
Yeah.
But
you weren't.
But I wasn't.
Yeah.
But that being said, it does have another face, though. It creates more trauma, not having support. But that being said, so we did another ultrasound. I went in, and by this time I was recovered mentally. I was like, okay, cool, we've got this.
Yeah.
I'm sure everything's fine. And then we go in, and I had an amazing doctor here that is also a believer. And they did the ultrasound, and she was taking a long time, the ultrasound tech. And then they put me back in the room. And they came in, and the doctor came in, and he just has this compassionate, sweet, kind vibe about him. And he came in and he put his arm around me and he said, I should have known that because it was you, this was going to happen. And I just thought, what does that even mean?
Right.
And I look back now, because if you know our family, you're like, how many things can happen to a family? You know?
Right.
But the Lord gives and the Lord takes away.
Yeah.
Blessed be his name. That's what I keep trying to tell myself, know? And I do continue to tell myself those truths, because no matter how I feel, what our circumstances are, that is the truth.
Right.
So, and that keeps us sane. God's word and his truth and him is actual sanity, you know? And, so Maddie he told me that basically it was worse than before, and 2/3 of the left side of his brain and then the right frontal lobe were completely gone. They had been severely damaged by a virus. They gave me a list of all the viruses that it could have been. We couldn't test for those until he came out. But what they told me was that he would probably die before he came out, before I delivered him, or shortly after.
Okay. So he did not have a very long lifespan.
That's what they were telling me. And so we went and saw specialists, and that's what a different specialist in pregnancy had said. And then they said, but we should at least send you to a pediatric neurosurgeon, because we don't really know. So in that waiting between when they had told me my son, I would either deliver a baby that had died or deliver my son dead, or he would die shortly after. Again, all of those thoughts started creeping in, that I wasn't grateful and that I wasn't, all those things. And, so we had a very short time, but they got us into the pediatric neurosurgeon, and we got into him. He goes, he is not going to die. He's not going to die. He said, I can't guarantee you his life will look like.
Yeah.
The quality of life, he might walk, he might not. He might talk, he might not. Because it's like you look at everyone with cerebral palsy, because that's what my son has now.
Okay, so that's his diagnosis.
That's his diagnosis.
There's so many different levels, kind of like an autism spectrum.
So it's
a spectrum.
Yeah, and you can see people that have CP where they've got one arm that's maybe, crippled.
They can walk.
And they can walk.
Yeah.
Or their speech is impeded, but you can still, with effort, understand them. Or, there's all these different.
Yeah.
And so my son was born, and we spent 33 days in the NICU. He had to have a VP shunt put in because he had where the brain had been attacked and killed, I guess you want to say. You didn't know. They said it was like a sponge. You want to you had to get the water out because where there's vacant space, water goes.
Correct.
And so he had a lot of water in his brain.
Yeah.
And so he was delivered 4 weeks early. I was induced, and he came out, and there was not a dry eye in the room. We had a physician who I loved, and I had a very hard pregnancy with Matthew for a lot of different reasons.
Right.
But I just said to the doctor, and it was this wonderful guy that I didn't know was going to be there, and I said, I just want 2 minutes when you take him out before you start hooking him up to tubes and doing all these things. I just want me and him. And he came out, and he didn't have great color, but he was doing okay. And I held him, and everybody was crying. And because, no matter how long, I got to be with my baby.
Yeah.
I didn't know what life was going to look like, but it was like that moment where I had him in my belly, and it's like, this is protection. This is where I could keep him safe. And I didn't want to bring him out into trauma.
The world, yeah.
Yeah. So I brought him out, and I was like, I just wanted that first moment for him to know that he was safe.
Yeah.
And so I brought him out, or they took him, and they thought they were going to have to intubate him. They did, and then he was like totally fine. So they extubated
him. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like almost instantly. I don't even know if they actually intubated him. It was all I was
out of it.
I was just given birth, and full natural, by the way. My epidural did not work, and so it was I was out of it.
Yeah.
But my husband followed him to the room, and he was doing great. He was totally holding his own, and he did amazing. But 24 hours later, he had to have that brain surgery where they put the shunt in and drain the fluid. And so he was put in a medically induced coma for about 6 days. And then when they extubated him, he had his first seizure. So then he started having seizures, and then we went down the road. He had to have a blood transfusion because he was just tiny. When you're taking a lot of blood, doing a lot of tests.
Right.
So, and maybe, later on I can, if people want to follow me, I have videos and pictures. And
well, you can go ahead and say what your handle is. Or wherever they
So just right now, I'm on Instagram. I do have a blog. I think it's courageoushumans.org.
Okay.
And I do have an Instagram page, and it's Courageous Humans. And I love to do reels. It's a creative outlet for me. And I love to tell stories I'm very passionate with music and pictures. They're both very, so
that information can be down in the description of this podcast. So anybody that wants to can go down and click on that and find that there.
So Matthew was born, and then we have our family.
Yeah.
And we bring him home. And back then I prepped Luke as much as I could. So you have a 5-year-old on the spectrum.
Yep.
And so the first 2 years where I had severe postpartum, and it was really rough, and we had a lot of community help. I would drop him off at my mom's at 4 a.m. crying because Luke was crying. I hadn't slept in days, and I mean, it was just chaos. And we'd be driving, and Luke would be covering his ears, in the car, and Maddie be crying, and because Maddie couldn't. For years, we prayed over Maddie that he would have the ability to self-comfort because I think all of his birth trauma and everything he went through and just seizures and just his brain, the way that was, he couldn't self-comfort.
Yeah.
So you couldn't set him down. Yeah. You couldn't hold still. You couldn't not have him near you. And so there was just, when you have another child already, it's like super hard. So fast forward, Matthew's had multiple surgeries. He had orthopedic surgery because, those issues come with cerebral palsy, but he was able to, kick and wiggle and laugh and, participate. He has cortical vision impairment. He's always battled epilepsy since that, probably about the 7th day of his, 14th day of his life.
Because of the brain stuff.
Yeah. So, but he had a major surgery about 4 years ago. He had a spinal fusion, and he ended up suffering a spinal cord injury
because of that. As a result,
of that. So our life looked, even though he had cerebral palsy, and a lot of people I think were like, well, he was immobile. He was in a wheelchair already. But a spinal cord injury looks completely different than cerebral palsy.
Right.
We're talking a paralyzed person. Yep. And so I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And so he is total care now. He is eligible for 120 hours of private duty nursing a week, but we only get 40 because there's a lot of, healthcare worker shortages.
Right.
So that being said, but yeah, we have a big life.
Yeah.
And we, if we don't do our job, if I don't do my job, somebody's going to die. And that's a lot of pressure.
That's a lot to carry. That's a lot. I want to ask you just a couple questions real quick. So you have 2 nonverbal. Is Matthew verbal?
No.
And Luke is sort of?
So Luke, now I love the new term coming up, non-speaking.
Non-speaking. Okay.
Non-speaking because
he communicates.
He communicates.
He can communicate. Okay.
He can communicate.
So, and Matthew is in a wheelchair.
Yep.
And he can't manage that wheelchair.
Nope.
You have to, or somebody has to.
He can't feed himself.
He can't feed himself.
Go to the bathroom.
He can't do any of that.
And sometimes when he's ill, can't breathe on his own.
Can't breathe, yes. I know the hospital is, while it's not your friend, has been, because it's...
We jokingly say we are frequent flyers.
Frequent flyers, yeah, for probably both boys.
Yeah.
And Luke has just endured a lot more medical stuff. I know seizures have developed over the years. And so you just have 2 very fragile boys, medically fragile, I guess you could say.
I think we just don't ever know what to expect.
Totally.
Yeah.
So really quickly, briefly, if you could give me just maybe the largest glaring example of struggles that maybe aren't so obvious. Obviously, you have the transportation, the wheelchair, Luke's seizures. You have so many obvious things when looking at your family that are struggles on the day-to-day, the stressors. But maybe what is one thing that isn't talked about quite as much when it comes to the struggles and the stress of having 2 disabled children?
I'll try to say this briefly. It's kind of twofold. I think that, I signed up to be a mom.
Right.
And it has changed and developed into now my oldest child is an adult.
Yeah.
And I am not just his mom, I'm his caregiver. And that's not something people think that kind of, I think, automatically goes into being a parent, but it doesn't. It looks drastically different. It requires an extensive amount of involvement that is so much more beyond parenting.
Right.
And it's forever. And so I think, people just go, well, you're their mom and dad. This should just come naturally to you, or you should just want to do this forever. And, we did.
Parenting doesn't even come naturally to some people. Right. It's just.
Right. And so I think that being a caregiver is so much different. And I think that what people don't realize is why I'm always advocating and trying to show people and encourage people and inspire people to do and to reach out to people like us and to our kids is that at any given moment, this could be you or me. If we get in a car wreck, we have a traumatic brain injury, a spinal cord injury, and then you could need full care. You could need a lot of care, or you could mentally change.
Yeah.
And you would hope and want desperately for someone to love you unconditionally, to care for you, to do things for you that are good and to do it well when no one else is looking.
Right.
When you can't scratch that itch, when your mind or your heart is longing for something, that someone's going to look at your eyes or try to figure out how to communicate with you so that you can get your needs met. Yeah, exactly. So it could be you. So that's what I kind of am trying to tell people. And secondly is just the mental health piece. Well, I guess I want to say just the strain it puts on our marriage.
Yeah. Which can also affect your mental health, I'm sure.
But also the powerful marriage that it has cultivated. Some people, I've heard the term trauma bonding.
Yeah.
And I've thought about that. And my husband and I have had open discussions about, is that us? Because we always want to check in and be like, is our marriage going to be strong? When? Because that's the reality. When we lose a child.
Yeah.
Our youngest son does not have a typical lifespan. We've been given his prognosis. We don't know.
Right.
But will our marriage be able to stand up under that weight? And are we actually best friends? Are we actually lovers? Are we actually all these things? Are we just stuck together because we've been glued together by all this trauma? And that is what we are always trying to cultivate and make sure that we are not doing, because we fell in love and we actually, we really like each other. He's my best friend, and date night, it's like, come hell or high water, like
you're making it happen, but it's a lot. You have to, where some people have to get a babysitter. If you could talk,
I'd be leaving you alone, buddy.
But I have to find a babysitter. You have to find a caregiver.
We have to find a caregiver, someone's medication certified that has, a medical background and a behavioral background for Luke, because you need to be able to be prepared for that. So that being said,
when this 21-year-old has a seizure or has a raging fit or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's $40 an hour for us to go out on a date, plus where we want to go. So $20 an hour. And that's because they're not charging us a lot.
Yeah.
So anyway, that being said, our marriage, we are dealing with and battling and growing and changing and trying to lean in to Jesus under the most difficult of circumstances, not just our circumstance with our kids, but the way, like, what we were both raised in. Not because our, moms were terrible necessarily, but they didn't have tools. We weren't given tools. Just things, with relationships, there's developmental things that happen. And that being said, we've learned and are learning against all odds. And I tell my husband, I text him, I said, I'm really proud of us.
Yeah.
So I tell him that a lot. I'm really proud of us. I don't know. People say, I don't know how you do it. I'm like, me neither.
I don't either.
Me neither.
Well, I have one last question for you. And it's a little bit maybe of a twofold question, but it is how I end every podcast. And I just want you to speak to the people listening, whether they find themselves in this situation or a similar situation with special needs, disabled children, or somebody in their life, or maybe somebody like me who you are in my life and you have special needs kids, but maybe I don't know how to engage or interact. I'm sure that you've gotten stares. I'm sure that there have been comments made. I'm sure that there's awkwardness, right, wrong, or indifferent, because it's in humanity. A lot of people don't know how to handle uncomfortable situations.
Right.
And so how can somebody be a good support to somebody in your situation? And what kind of encouragement would you offer somebody like you?
I think I'm going to quote one of my most dearest friends who's been a mentor. She's like my spiritual mom. Pain is not contagious,
right?
But joy is.
Yeah.
And I think that when you look at a family like ours, we walk in a room and it's a lot. And I give people the freedom that when I speak, when I do speaking engagements or when I write or when I, we have conversations and I do trainings, I want people to have the freedom to feel that openly. Yeah. Because where are we going to go if you feel like you can't be authentic, if you feel like you can't struggle, if you feel like you can't ask questions? And if you feel like you can't be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But what the difference is between, I think, a person that wants to grow and a person that doesn't is, are you going to move forward in the discomfort? Are you going to press in that or not? And if you're not, then I don't have space for you in my life.
Yeah.
It sounds terrible. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But my space is limited.
Yeah.
And if I'm giving a person tools and my husband, but I think that my family, we represent suffering in some ways, in a lot of ways, and suffering equals sanctification. Suffering is intentional. And I think that I have looked at it incorrectly for a long time. Suffering feels random. It feels like an attack. It feels like an assault. It feels unfair. Now, all those things could feel true, and they are, to me, I battle all those things often. And so I do feel all those things and believe all those things from time to time. But more so now, I'm like, this is very intentional.
Yeah.
Like my growth, God is committed to my growth. And he's committed to my family's growth. And he's committed that my boys have a plan and a purpose on this planet. And it is my job to carve that path to make sure that they're able to have that platform.
Yeah.
And after I'm gone, in all those ways. So that being said, I think that in the church, we have my family, and in relationships and in my family, God uses us to purify the impurity, like to get out the impurities, to bring out, inauthenticity and people that, don't want to grow and just all those things. And we really have the opportunity to meet a lot of people and we just give people the space and the freedom to not do it perfect. And that's weird because I say jokingly, a recovering perfectionist. I relapse a lot.
Yeah.
But I do have a high standard in some ways, but not in this way because I want people to connect with my kids.
Yeah.
And I want to connect with my kids, and we don't want to be isolated. So if I'm right there ready to criticize or ready to come down on someone for the way that they do it, then I'm not going to have a relationship. And I think that's God's heart.
Yeah.
That's his heart with us.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, hey, could you clean up, have the right words, and do it all right, and then come to me. He says, come and let us reason together. Though your sins are as scarlet, I'll make them whiter than snow. And that's his character. I just hear his character. And so he's so gracious with me, and I am always working on being gracious with others. And my kids create a lot of opportunities for that.
Right.
That being said, though, I mean, like if I'm talking to someone else, I think just in this situation, or that's a caregiver, or that something just happened to their spouse, or, all these different situations, suffering. If you're suffering, just know that it's going to be weird.
Yeah.
Top thing, it's going to be weird.
Yeah.
It's going to be weird for others. It's going to be weird for you.
Embrace the awkward, though.
Embrace the awkward. Yeah.
Lean into it instead
Lean into it and know that it has intentional purpose.
Yeah.
It is not in vain.
I love that. Thank you so much, Amber. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you just being honest and sharing your heart. And obviously, there's so much more to your story. Yes. And like I said, you can go down to the description and click on and follow and learn a little bit more about Luke and Maddie and your family. But thank you so much for your story. I just appreciate it. Praise God.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation on the Stories Unveiled podcast. We would love it if you would leave us a rating or review. If you would like to learn more about Stories Unveiled and our events, go to storiesunveiledconference.com or follow us on Facebook or Instagram at storiesunveiled_. The Stories Unveiled podcast is created in partnership with KTSY and Barefoot Media Ministries. For more encouragement and other podcasts, visit ktsy.org. Have an incredible day and go live unveiled.